Good morning, and welcome to the First Baptist Church of Dunn Sunday School lesson. I'm Larry Snipes bringing the lesson this morning, this 30th day of July, 2023. This morning we're going to be studying about Jacob and Laban. It takes perseverance to reach a goal. People can change. Jacob, the youngest twin son of Isaac and Rebekah, had made a bad faith bargain with his brother Esau and deceived his father to gain Esau's inheritance. Now that he had a personal encounter with God, will change Jacob. Will Jacob change? This week's scriptures begin to show some potential growth and maturation in Jacob. He shows that he has the patience to persevere towards a goal. He has love and loyalty to his family and can be a hard worker. The story does not address Jacob's faith, but Jacob is growing into his role as the leader of God's chosen family. We can learn about the character of God through the other members of the family as well. In today's lessons, we will pay attention not only to Jacob, but also to the attitudes and actions of Laban, Rachel, and Leah. We have seen how Jacob made a selfish bargain with his older brother Esau. Later, Jacob tricked his elderly father to gain the blessings that belonged to Esau. And then he had to escape his older brother's understandable anger. His mother Rebekah sent him to safety at her brother's Laban's home. And on the way there, Jacob dreamed a vision from God and received God's blessing. Today we will see what happens when he reaches his uncle Laban's household and the tables are turned on Jacob the trickster. Our first set of scriptures today is entitled Jacob and Laban Make a Deal. It comes from Genesis chapter 29, verses 15 through 20. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kindred, you should therefore serve me for nothing. Tell me what wages shall be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. The story we're about to hear does not mention God at all. When you face challenges, how do you remind yourself that God is with you? What do you do when you don't feel God's presence? Throughout the Old Testament, we see a common question. Why do God's people still have to suffer after they put their faith in God, when in contrast, those who reject God seem to enjoy a problem-free life? The prophet Jeremiah asked, "Why does the way of the guilty prosper? Why do all the treacherous survive? Experiencing suffering in the world instead of blessings they expect." Jeremiah notes the response of God's people. He's blind to our ways. The prophet Habakkuk expressed a similar concern when he asked God, "Why do you look on the treacherous and the silent when the wicked swallow more righteousness than they?" The psalmist observed the prosperity of the wicked who have no pain, whose bodies are sound and sleek, and who are not in trouble as others are. He sees the people praising the wicked and questioning God. They asked, "How can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High?" All these Old Testament spokespeople discover that coming into a relationship with God does not immunize them from the trials and tribulations of life. Jacob discovers that truth in the story presented in our text. After Jacob's encounter with the living God in the experience we studied in last week's lesson, Jacob seems to be on the right terms with God. He sets up a pillar of stone to honor God and pledges, Lord, you shall be my God. This is a different Jacob who continues his journey to find his wife. With God on his side, he must be asking himself, what blessings lie ahead? However, instead of an uninterrupted flow of blessings, he continues to experience conflicts and misunderstanding with his conniving uncle Laban. He also finds himself caught between two women. In addition, he must still face an estranged brother who wants to kill him. Laban's offer, Genesis 29 through 15, which is our first scripture that we have just read. The opening words of our text then points us to the context provided by the previous verses. Let me highlight this context. Jacob is no longer at Bethel, where he experiences the exciting theophany. He arrived at Haran. When he arrives, Jacob experiences parallel in many ways the experience of Abraham's servants that is described in Genesis 24. The setting of both studies is a well where people bring their sheep to find water. The purpose of both stories is to identify the ones whom Isaac and Jacob are to marry. As Rebekah suddenly appears and catches the attention of the servant in the earlier stories, Rachel suddenly appears and catches the attention of Jacob in this story. In both stories, God uses these special encounters to fulfill God's plan. When Jacob meets Rachel, he identifies himself as her father's kinsman. When she hears this, she reports this news to her father, sparking an enthusiastic family reunion. From Jacob's perspective, Laban is a prosperous patriarch who owns many sheep, and he hopes to find refuge with his uncle. From Laban's perspective, Jacob is an excellent worker who can help him care for his sheep and watch over his land. He encourages Jacob to remain with him. Jacob stayed with him for a month. Then the biblical writer tells us in the opening verse of our text, after Jacob arrives in Haran and meets Rachel and works for Laban for a month without pay, and after Jacob recognizes Laban as his kinsman, Laban asks Jacob how much he must pay him to remain as a co-worker in his estate. Laban's daughters is our next theme, and it's also in the first passage of scripture that I read, 29:16 through 20. At this point, the plot thickens. Instead of demanding a certain level of wage, Jacob asks for the hand of Laban's daughter Rachel in marriage. Our text reveals that Laban has two daughters, Leah and the older daughter Rachel. The younger daughter, who is the younger daughter? The biblical writer then describes these two daughters. About Leah, the writer concludes, Leah's eyes are weak, meaning this meaning of Hebrew words is not certain. Sometimes it's translated as lovely. The description of Leah as having lovely eyes seems to present a positive image. The Hebrew words mean tender as well, which carries a positive connotation. However, some translations render this word in a different sense. The updated different versions of the Bible all say that she had weak eyes, suggesting that Leah lacked the sparkle in her eyes that was the keystone of beauty in the ancient world. About Rachel, the writer announces, Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Biblical writers frequently use the word that is translated beautiful in English to identify people of unusual lovely appearance. See, for example, the use of the word in describing Sarah, David, and Abraham. Jacob's affection goes to the younger daughter, beautiful Rachel, instead of the older daughter, weak-eyed Leah. Jacob's affection for Rachel prompts him to offer an unusual deal to Laban. He tells Laban, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Why did he make such an offer or this deal? The 7 years offers go beyond the normal contract of time. Even for male Hebrew slaves, 6 years was the limit of service according to Exodus 21:2. Why does Jacob make such a generous offer? Does he want to force Laban's hand by offering him a deal too good to refuse? Does he offer to stay with Laban for 7 years because he knows Esau waits for him back home with revenge on his mind, and he hopes that 7 years of separation from his brother will allow Esau to cool off? Or does he make this offer to impress upon Rachel how much he loves her? The biblical writer leans toward the latter explanation by concluding that for Jacob, these 7 years seemed to him as a few days because of his love he had for her. Why does Laban accept Jacob's offer? To begin with, Jacob is a part of his family. He is the son of Laban's sister, Rebekah. They share the same blood and the same heritage, the same faith. This family connection contributes to Laban's acceptance of Jacob's offer. In addition, this arrangement benefits Laban because it provides 7 years of free labor from his nephew. After observing Jacob's work for 1 month, Laban realizes how valuable his service can be. Further, Jacob's willingness to work for 7 years without pay will allow Jacob to provide Laban a dowry for Rachel's hand. In the ancient world, the family of the groom offered a dowry to the family of the bride. The dowry served 2 purposes. It provided financial security for the bride in case her husband died. It also compensated the bride's family for their financial loss when the bride left their family. Since Jacob comes to Laban empty-handed, he obviously has no dowry. The wages he earns but does not receive for 7 years of labor will provide equivalent of a dowry for Rachel's hand. And our next set of scriptures is Genesis 29, 27, and 28. Complete the week of this one, and we will give the other in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. And verses 29 through 26. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all people of the palace and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. When the morning came, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" Laban said, "This is not done in our country, giving the youngest daughter before the firstborn." In Genesis 29 through 21, we see another then. With the word then, the biblical writer fast forward 7 years to the end of the contract between Jacob and Laban. Jacob has kept his side of the bargain. Laban for 7 years. Now he demands that Laban keep his side of the bargain. "Give me my wife, that I may go into her," Jacob asserts, "for my time is complete." Unfortunately, Laban has an alternative plan. In response to Jacob's demand, Laban sets the date and gathers all their friends for the wedding feast. We don't know how long the feast lasts, but we can be sure that the family provides a luxurious feast and much wine flows. And at the appropriate time, Jacob will withdraw with his fully veiled bride into the darkness of the honeymoon chamber to consummate his marriage. In the meantime, while Jacob enjoys the activities of the feast, Laban initiates his plan. Instead of sending Rachel to the place where she and Jacob will come together, Laban sends his daughter Leah. In a half-drunken stupor, Jacob goes into the wedding chamber and consumes his marriage with his new bride. However, Jacob wakes up the next morning with more than a hangover. He wakes up to the shock of his life. The woman in bed with him is not the beautiful Rachel, for whom he worked 7 years. It is her older sister, weak-eyed Leah. The biblical writer captures Jacob's surprise with a second summary of the situation. When morning came, it was Leah. Why does Laban renege on his promise to Jacob? Why does he send Leah into the wedding chamber instead of Rachel? Jacob demands an explanation. Laban explains that he has no choice. Local customs obligate him to make sure Leah, the oldest daughter, marries before allowing the younger sister to be married. Laban's argument is disingenuous at best and misleading at worst. If he is so concerned about custom, Laban should have presented his dilemma to Jacob before asking him to work for 7 years for Rachel. Understandably, Leah's complicity in this plot at Rachel's expense will create tension in both her relationship with Jacob and in her relationship with her sister. The initial tension will eventually evolve into an ongoing competition between the two sisters and wreak havoc in Jacob's family. The last set of scriptures is 29, 27 through 28. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other, also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week, and Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. Laban does not concede that he has manipulated Jacob. He only explains the way that Jacob can finally get what he wants. Laban will allow Jacob to marry Rachel after Jacob completes the first week of marriage with Leah. Then he can immediately take Rachel as his wife, but Laban will require him to work an additional 7 years to pay off Rachel's dowry. Jacob will have 2 wives, and Laban will have a secure husband for both his daughters and gain another 7 years of service from this relative. Despite his disappointment, once Jacob has sexual relations with Leah, he cannot opt out of the relationship. Jacob must honor the marriage to Leah. He still wants Rachel as his wife. At this point, Laban presents the second part of his plan. He offers Rachel to Jacob if he will promise to work for another 7 years. Jacob recognizes that since his marriage to Leah cannot be annulled, his best option is to accept Laban's offer. Notice that Jacob does not have to work another 7 years before he can take Rachel as his wife. After going through the week of celebration over Leah's wedding, he can immediately take Rachel as his wife. In conclusion, first conclusion, it is a gift to receive a vision from God, and Jacob's father and grandfather had experienced God's presence in a personal and powerful ways. Jacob, who had not been a model of faithful behavior so far in his life, is blessed by God's presence, and he promises even he tries to escape the consequences of his greed and deceptions. In an amazing dream, he receives a glimpse of the connection between heaven and earth. He sees angels in motion traveling between 2 realms. He even hears the voice of God. Jacob is blessed to hear 8 promises from God that will change the course of his life and his family relationships. How could anyone remain the same after such an encounter? God reveals God's self-announced plans and promises not just for the individual lives, but for generations. What lessons can we learn from the story in our text? Jacob illustrates the truth that I discussed in the introduction to this lesson. Life is not a walk in the park, even for those who commit themselves to God's plan. I remember someone saying, every person is either a problem, has a problem, or lives with one. Jacob discovers that truth, and we will as well. A productive life is not one without challenge. A productive life is one in which we see how we can make things work amid our challenges, rather than complain about how they are wrong. Jacob also reminds us that life is an echo. What we experience in life often echoes our own actions. Jacob cannot complain too loudly about Laban's manipulation that led to his marriage to the wrong daughter after he had instigated a comparable manipulation when he wrestled from his father the birthright that belonged to his brother Esau. An old saying, what goes around comes around. Jacob experiences the truth of that statement. Perhaps Jacob's most enduring contribution is his reminder that some things are worth waiting and working for. Others had demonstrated this truth. It took J.R.R. Tolkien 12 years to write The Lord of the Rings, one of literature's greatest fantasies, and originally published in 1954, but entertaining us on the movie screens today. Harrison Ford is one of America's most beloved actors. When he started Star Wars in 1977, the magazine touted him as an overnight success. Ford is one of America's most beloved actors. Yes, it was a night that lasted 15 years. Madame Curie is the only woman to win the Nobel Prize twice for her discovery of radium, but she had to wait 8 years before getting into Paris to study. Some things are worth waiting for. As we close, our prayer is, precious Lord, when we do not reach out to you, continue guiding us still. Help our characters grow in the way you desire. Strengthen our perseverance. Keep us wise in our interactions with others and true to you. Amen. Thank you for tuning in to the First Baptist Church of Dunn Sunday School lesson.